Hey, what's up, you guys? My name is Grace Lauren Taylor, and you are listening to episode 18 of the Trauma Dump Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Here at the Trauma Dump Podcast, we seek to answer the question, what is mental health? How do I take care of my own? And how do I support others? This week, we will be discussing the topic of deconstruction and healing religious trauma with our very special guest, pastoral counselor Brooke Owens. Please go check her out after the episode. Her TikTok is amazing. It's Spicy Counselor. Peak TikTok content. If you want to learn more about healing from sexual trauma, please go check out her TikTok. The link is in our description or click here. I'm so happy that you're here, and I'd love to get to know you better. So please come join us over on our Discord, where you can chat with others and share anonymously your burdens and get support for them. We have so many different channels of discussion that range through various topics that include way more than just trauma. We have a Minecraft server, we have a meme channel, so please come join us over on our Discord to get peer support for absolutely no cost. I really hope that you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please share it with your favorite people, and please like and subscribe to us over on our YouTube channel, where you can see the video version of this podcast. So this week we will be discussing the topic of deconstruction and healing from religious trauma. Our guest of the week is Brooke Owens. Make sure you go check her out after the episode and show her some love. Remember, if you'd like to share on the show, please message us in our podcast Discord along with your unique experiences, and we will match you to the right episode. Religious abuse is abuse administered under the guise of religion. It includes harassment or humiliation that may result in psychological trauma. Religious abuse may include the misuse of religion for selfish, secular, or ideological ends, such as the abuse of a clerical position. It is also not limited to coercing into giving money or other resources that you did not want to give. It can also include forcing intimacy or sex without consent for the false purpose of pleasing God. Just a quick disclaimer before we start. I am not a licensed health professional, though we are interviewing one this episode. This podcast only seeks to create community and further understanding of these topics that are so often overlooked and extremely misunderstood. If you are in need of medical professional help, we have resources in our description, and we have so many resources on our Discord. The topics discussed here are for a mature audience, so viewer discretion is always advised. Any attempt to exert power and control over someone by the use of religion, faith, or beliefs is spiritual abuse. Spiritual abuse can happen within a religious organization or a personal relationship. Spiritual abuse or religious abuse is not limited to one denomination or group of people, and it is not limited to one religion. It can happen in any religious group. It can also happen as an element of child abuse, elder abuse, or domestic violence. Abuse is a pattern in which one individual, whether an intimate partner or a person of authority, uses fear, intimidation, violence, or another form of harm to control someone else. Abuse can cause serious trauma and have a significant impact on your mental health. It's important to know that abuse is never the fault of the victim, but always the fault of the abuser, or the perpetrator, rather. If you have been abused, I really want to reach out my hand to you and say, I'm so sorry. It is not your fault. You did not deserve it, and you are so fully welcome here. I would love to hear your stories in the comments below, and I would love to get to know you personally and be a support for you if that's what you would like.
Okay. Hello. Welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today? I'm good. I'm happy to be here. How are you?
I am vibing
Love
hard.
that. Your makeup is good. Like the hair
Thank
is good.
you. Thank you.
Yes.
I am aspiring to be Merida, but on like a level where she just accepts it's okay to wear makeup and just be feminine. Because I feel like, I relate to Merida on so many levels. So many
Really?
levels. Yes. I mean, the mother trauma,
Mm.
those attachment wounds. I mean, she has three brothers. I have two.
Wow.
Her deep connection with her dad. I had a really deep connection with my dad. Like,
A lot. A lot
it's
of relating.
it's a great movie.
I
Also,
mean, truly.
it is. Also, we have Gigi. If she ever makes any noises, there
Oh.
she is. Gigi, say hello.
Hi,
Say hello.
Gigi. Oh my gosh. Wait, she's beautiful.
Thank you. She is my service dog. She's a seizure alert service dog. So if she barks, we just know that we might need to take a break.
And that's fun.
Yes. Yes, she's a great girl. So,
Oh,
welcome to the podcast. You
yes.
have, I think, 78,000 followers on TikTok, which is a lot of people. How do you feel about
Yeah.
that?
It was honestly, it's like weird. Yeah, it's weird. I think I like forget what that would mean like in a group or like a room full of people, like 78,000. I don't think about it that often because
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't like trying to gain followers. So it's like weird.
How do you use your platform?
Um well, what's interesting is primarily now I use it to talk about mental health, relationship issues, sex, religious trauma, all those kinds of things. But it originally started a couple years ago when I was still in school getting my master's. And I was posting it about my own like personal traumas and like things I was learning that were really impactful to my life. And then it just sort of like slowly morphed into
Mm-hmm.
what it is today.
Yeah.
So,
I think I've been following it with my personal account for a while because honestly, we could be sisters. We look alike. And I saw you and I was like, she looks like me.
that's a high compliment. So, thank you.
Oh, no, you're beautiful. You're gorgeous. But, I really like your content. Honestly, it's very mischievous in a way. Like, and I did grow up in a very um sexually repressed, religious
Yeah.
household. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of
Same.
girls did. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's very much the norm of young women to be taught that, don't touch boys, boys are gross, don't touch yourself, don't touch anyone. And for me, as a young one, because I was attracted to girls far before I was attracted to boys, and I was very shamed, because I told my mom, I think when I was very, very little, that I wanted a girlfriend, and she freaked out, to say
Oh
the
no, yeah.
least, to say the least.
Yeah.
And when I was 14, 15, I told her again, I was like, I came out as bisexual, and that she despised me. And that very same year, I think I was also raped in my church. And I felt like I couldn't tell her because she had shamed me so much. And, long story short, I became really suicidal because I repressed it so much. And, there's a lot of victim blaming in the church. And I did try to commit. And instead of getting me help, instead of helping me at all, my mother sent me to live with my grandparents. Like that sounds everything, right?
To
No.
sort of like straighten you out. Was that the idea?
Yeah.
Or
Yes, because see,
yeah.
I'm Jamaican, as my mother would call me. My birth certificate says Caucasian Jamaican. My dad's family is from Jamaica, and both of his parents are very strict Baptist Jamaican people. They're very strict. Love them to death. My papa has since passed away, but my Mimi and I have gotten a lot closer since my papa has passed, which is also very bizarre.
Mm.
but they were extremely controlling grandparents. I think I was more raised by them than I was my own parents, to be quite frank with you. And they
Yeah.
had a lot of rules, a lot of, guidelines of children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. Like,
Yep.
spare the rod, spoil the child. The rod of
That's,
correction will drive foolishness is bound in the heart of the child, but the rod of correction will drive it far from him.
I'm impressed you still have these memorized.
I had to because we were
Yeah.
spanked.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was very ingrained. Like, Bible
Mhm.
verses were very ingrained in my childhood and in my mind. It was everything. And so I guess my mother was like, I don't want to deal with this child. I'm gonna send them to grandparents. Grandparents will fix it. And she did that with all three of us kids. And I bring this up because a lot of your videos discuss shame. And I really wanted to get your insight on, first what you define shame as, and how you have coped with your own shame and how you want to help others cope with their shame.
Yeah. Man. Well, first, thank you for just like telling me a bunch of really personal things about yourself. I don't ever, I mean, it's kind of like what I do, but I don't ever take it lightly when somebody does, because these are things, they're not just a story. You're telling me there's things you lived. So I just appreciate you sharing that, setting the scene with that. Um, that's a really great question. So for me, shame, I mean, we kind of always hear the difference between shame and guilt, right? That guilt is over feeling bad about something you've done, right? And shame is feeling bad about who you are. And I think that's honestly the simplest but most precise way to describe it is shame always tells you that something's wrong or lacking or bad about you as a person. And it's very hard to separate who you are from that feeling of shame. It just becomes ingrained into your identity. And it's not productive in the same way that guilt can be productive, right? To like make something right or to make amends or to apologize. Shame always wants you to hide and suppress because you feel like something is wrong and bad with you. Um, and that's primarily how I have experienced it as a person. Um, Man, I've experienced shame in like varying degrees. A lot of it around sex and sexuality, and but even in terms of some differences of belief that I had from my family, different opinions, right? Like not conforming to the very rigid guidelines of what it meant to be at the time when I was a good Christian, and especially being a good Christian woman. There's so many layers of what's expected of you. And if you don't meet those, right, pretty stringently, there is, I mean, shame is like the number one tool used to kind of get you back in line. Um, so that's, yeah, I mean, I can definitely go more in depth, but those are the biggest areas I felt like a lot of, I just felt like something was wrong with me in terms of um, me liking girls, or in terms of like me not feeling like a good wife when I was married, right? Or me feeling like I didn't know if I like believed in hell anymore. And like that was a huge thing where I was like, oh, there's just like I'm lacking faith, I'm lacking trust, I'm lacking knowledge, which means something's wrong with me because like nobody else is struggling in this way. At least that's what shame kind of tells you. So
Hmm. Yeah, and the whole I'm lacking knowledge, dude, that resonates heavily with me because I don't know. I was always taught that like knowledge is power, and if you don't know something, you're an idiot. And it's ridiculous because in a lot of religion in general, or what it's supposed to be, is about finding yourself, learning something new, connecting with source. Like, knowledge is endless. You're always going to be learning, changing, growing,
yeah.
maturing. But with a lot of, I would say, toxic Christians, it's a competition over who knows the most Bible verses, or who has a deeper connection with Jesus, who knows more, who has more knowledge of the Bible, how can you debate? And my papa would always tell us, he's like, well, the demons know more about Jesus than you do, so they're really going to try and test your faith. And from my own experience, it made me very frustrated when I didn't know something, because it was always like, well, you should have already known. Like, or the idea of, like, my papa would tell us, oh, I've already told you this, why don't you remember? And I think shame is really a huge marker of Christianity now, because it's like, we're shamed, like, you were born in sin, you were born sinful, and the only thing that could ever save you, the only thing that could ever redeem you is Jesus. And that statement alone is what some Christians believe full-heartedly, but it's such a shameful statement, because we don't control that we're born. We can't, we can't control that we now exist. We're just living. Nobody knows right from wrong. It's taught. Knowledge is not inherent, it's learned. And that's what frustrates me so much about Christianity, and in my own, like, I guess spiritual journey is what it's called. But in my own spiritual journey, I've had to relearn or unlearn the practice of shaming myself if I don't know something. And what a wonder it is to just not know something, of being like, oh my goodness, I've learned something new. That's so exciting. It's just that I feel like that is robbed from a lot of people because of shame.
No, I'd agree. There's sort of an addiction to certainty. I mean, that's kind of a human trait, but you see it really intensified in religion. Of, instead of it being sort of this discovery process, right, of asking more questions, asking a bigger question, being comfortable in, I'm not sure, right? There is this idea that you must be certain, and you must be loud with your certainty too. Otherwise, it's evidence that something is wrong in your relationship with God. And it's always put on you, right? Because God is perfect. At least what I heard growing up is that, like, well, God never moves away from you, right? So you're the one moving away with your actions, your lack of prayer, your lack of reading the Bible, or your sin. And so it's sort of this idea of, it's just always your fault. And also this incredible discomfort with just saying, I don't know, I'm not sure about that. And that has been that's sort of where I'm resting now with my faith, if you want to call it that, is just, I feel much more comfortable saying, like, I'm just not sure. Like, and how could you be so sure? Like, that's where the vehicle of faith comes in for most religions. Like, these are things we cannot see, we cannot observe. We're essentially talking in the realm of feelings, which is fine. But to say that there is certainty, I think it gets us into a lot of trouble, to be honest. There's a lot of, like, very black and white thinking. And it felt very disingenuous to me for a long time, even when I was a Christian, because I was like, how are we going to give our entire life and, like, being and soul to this being, and I'm not allowed to be uncertain about any aspect of that? Like, that's a huge, like, I'm giving my life to Christ. That's the biggest thing I could give to anyone. And these questions I have, I'm essentially supposed to swallow them. It never made any sense to me in that regard.
Yeah. I don't know. The certainty aspect of, like, you need to be certain. Oh my goodness. I was challenged so much as a child by my papa. Now, for those listening, my grandparents on my mother's side are immigrants from Jamaica. They're immigrants. And my papa was a deacon in the Baptist church at First Baptist Dallas. Very, very religious man, very, very religious. And he became more lax on it as I got older, and he had 3 strokes. So, but my entire childhood, my father would tell me, the papa that you know is not the papa that I knew growing up. He was much, much more strict, much more, you know, just challenging of people and their beliefs, very confrontational. And I think back on that, I'm like, well, he was much more like aggressive. Like, how could he be more aggressive? Like, as a child, I was like, oh my goodness, what?
Yeah.
And he would very much challenge our beliefs as a kid, which, in retrospect, that's okay, limited. But with a child, it was almost, I hate the term gaslighting, but it was kind of like gaslighting, where we're taught all the time as children, when we're born in the Baptist church, like, you're giving your life to Christ, you get baptized, you're saved. Like, he would put a lot of emphasis on, you need to be baptized, you're going to be baptized in the church, and you're going to be a part of the family of the Lord. And it's like, am I not already a part of the family of the Lord just by believing Jesus? No, you need to be baptized, and then you need to go out into the nations, as he would put it, and start spreading the word of God. And as a child, we would all, me and my 12 cousins, we would all pray together whenever we went to Mimi and Papa's house, and we would all sit around the table, and no one was allowed to eat or drink until we prayed, and no one was allowed to get up from the table until everyone was done eating. And he used a lot, shame was really utilized a lot in that household of, you know, I came from a country that was third world country, that there's children that are starving on the streets, and they would want your food. You got to eat your food. And it did give me an eating disorder growing up, because I felt like I had to finish it. I had to finish it. And I think it was also translated into like my own faith of like, I need to know more. I need to know more. I need to be able to stand up for myself, because I'm going to get bullied by my grandfather if I don't know something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
There's, I mean, it sort of sounds, what you're saying sounds really familiar to me in terms of like clients I work with. It's this idea that it is really just like never okay to just like rest and be. There's always something more to be done or learned or worked on with yourself, right? Like to to feel as though everything is good and maybe things are fine, right? Is to be complacent and to be
Mm.
lazy. And those have moral judgments attached to them in Christianity. Those are awful things to be called in that framework. And so it's this idea, and I see it a lot with people who are kind of deconstructing, is it's this idea of really never feeling fully allowed to just like rest and accept yourself, because there's always that refining process that we talk a lot about in Christianity, where you're just always trying to improve, you're always trying to learn more. The devil is always coming after you in some way, the world is wicked and coming after you in some way. You can never rest, really. I mean, especially in the denomination I grew up with, like even things like prayer and like meditation in the Lord, which you would think would be restful, were very like, we're going to war on this thing in the world, right? Or this movement or this spirit of rebellion, or we're going to like pray for revival until we are like, blue in the face. And it's just the idea that you can't ever rest. And a lot of churches will utilize that in sort of an abusive way, in terms of like to keep people working and volunteering and doing more and more without pay or compensation, really. And the idea is that the Lord will enliven you, will strengthen you. And so you're not relying on your own strength. So why would you get tired? Why would you need rest? Why would you need any basic human need met? Because it's supernatural, right? Like and it creates sort of this incredible burnout cycle that I think we're seeing a lot of the results of now, with a lot of younger people leaving organized religion. I think it's just massive burnout in that way.
Mm-hmm. And especially if you, from like young age of like 2 years old, your church every Sunday, every Wednesday, you're devoting so much time to this being that you cannot see, that you cannot feel, that you cannot speak to, devoted to constant prayer, constant meditation, constant work, constant service. I went to Watermark Church. I went to First Baptist Church. I went to a bunch of other little churches, and their basis is service. You need to serve. We need more people to come serve. Come on, guys, you need to serve for Jesus. Volunteer for these mission trips where you're paying a lot of money to these churches to go on a mission to go help other people. And I had so many mission trips growing up. I went to a lot. I went to Jamaica many times growing up. I went to like Illinois. I went to Florida. We went to Alabama. We would help build houses. We made jewelry for people. And I don't know, as a child, I was like, why am I making jewelry? Why, what is happening? But in Jamaica, all the missions were very good. Like I always felt like I was needed, that I was appreciated, but that wasn't an organized church. Whenever I was in an organized church, it was like more of a vacation than anything. It never felt like true service. It never felt like I was doing something that made a difference, that mattered. And they always called it mission trips. And I thought to myself, this isn't a real mission trip. I know what a real mission trip is. My grandparents are missionaries. But even then, as a little kid, I'm staying up really late. I'm sorting medical documents because we ran a medical mission in Jamaica for young women, young mothers. And I was constantly exhausted. So exhausted, not getting paid for this work. I mean, I was a child, so it's technically child labor, but I was always doing my best, and it was always reinforced that, you are working for the Lord. You're not working for men. Do it for God. Do it for God.
Yeah.
God made you able-bodied. You need to serve for the Lord. Yeah. And I hear it all the time. And like, I've visited a couple churches, and I've made my personal conviction that I no longer want to support organized religion. I don't want to go to churches anymore because it's all for money. You never really know what's going to happen in the church. I would much rather have a small fellowship of just people that just gather in like houses and just talk. Yeah. I think that's what Christianity really was supposed to be, instead of these mega churches in Texas. And it's wild. But I went to a couple churches because that shame of my childhood got brought up, and it's like, okay, I need to go back to church. And I visited a couple, and they were all like, well, you just joined us. Come meet us. Come join our serve team. That's the best way you could get plugged into the churches, if you come and serve. And so I went, and they're holding you for 6-7 hours. You're not getting paid. You do get like cookies or muffins, but it's like they want you to pick up these giant chairs and move stuff and contact people and write letters to people. And I'm thinking to myself, why aren't we getting paid for this? And I left early, and then someone ran after me. He's like, why are you leaving? I'm like, I have to go home. I have to go to my house. I also had a service dog with me, and I was like, she needs to go to the bathroom. And it was very heavily monitored. I never went back there. I was like, this is a cult. I'm not going back. But
I wish I could say that that's like a one-off experience, but that is it. I mean, church only exists because of free labor. There's no way around that. And it's interesting, especially with like the bigger mega churches, because their whole thing is like, we're not a business, right? We're a family. But then they operate tax wise just like a giant business. And so they sort of try to have their cake and eat it too, right? Where they're raking in thousands, some of these mega churches, millions of dollars, right? Not getting taxed, which is like a whole different thing. And then they're also not paying their labor. So like their profit margins are explosive. And so it's like, for me, it always felt like, if you're going to operate like a business, operate like a business, then just own that you're a business. You're a church business. Pay your employees, like pay the tax, and then just like don't put the kind of BS cover of like, we're all a family, this is service, like you're giving unto the Lord. Because at a certain point, like I was like on the worship team for years, like I mean, fully involved. At a certain point, it just feels like you are being taken advantage of in a lot of ways, and it makes it really hard to like show up with a good attitude and like in the spirit and like all that kind of stuff, when you're like, I feel as though I'm being exploited by people who are saying that they're my family, which is even worse than a business that would be exploiting me. Because that, like, I would rather you say we're a business and we're working on getting good policy versus saying you're a family and then exploiting the people that are supposedly your family. I mean, that's a whole different layer of mistrust and deception, because there's that personal buy-in that you need at church. That's sort of like the heart of the whole thing, is we're meant to be a community, but then our community is kind of not really looking out for one another, which always felt very contradictory to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially with the cost of living right now, it's horrible. I'm currently trying to find a house for rent with my partner. We live in Dallas, but he works in Little Elm. And for those of you that don't know, that's an hour to an hour and a half drive commute. You know,
Oh wow.
back is an hour and a half, going there is an hour, and he wakes up at 4 a.m. every morning. And it's ridiculous, and he's losing his mind. So we're trying to find a house in Little Elm. And houses are extremely expensive. What the heck?
Yeah.
Like, what?
They're so bad.
The
Yeah.
apartments over there are worse, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, because it's all luxury apartments, so they want to charge luxury prices.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like losing my mind. I'm pulling out my hair. And so I don't technically have a job. I am, this is my job. This isn't an LLC. I also sell bracelets that I make myself, and I also teach voice lessons. But that income is very limited because I am disabled. I have seizures, and I can't work a normal job. Legitimately can't, because I never know what's going to happen with me. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna work for myself. And when I was trying to figure out, okay, I need to teach voice lessons because I have a degree in theater and I minored in voice, might as well use my degree. And there were hirings for vocal performers for all these churches, and I'm like, these churches are paying for these roles? And I looked into it, and they're like, yeah, we pay you for the performance, but not for the practice. I'm like, so I'm going to be spending 5-6 hours with a band, like, because I know how often they practice, because I was in worship team too. I know how often they practice, and it's like I'm there 12 hours a week. I'm not getting paid for it, and I'm only getting paid a portion of whatever for actual performance. I'm thinking myself, that's bunk. That's ridiculous.
Truly it is. Yeah.
And I was like, why is that? And so I started looking into it, because this is ridiculous. And I found so many articles of these worship leaders, and they're famous and they have like these followings, but they're not really getting paid a lot. And it unlocked something in my brain of Little Grace in choir, that I remember someone telling someone else, you're getting paid in exposure. And I thought to myself, is that what they think payment is? Because at these mega churches, like the worship leaders are very, very well known. They're very revered. Like they all have followings on social media. Some of them actually start to get a music contract and they travel around and, valid vibes, go off king, but you're getting exploited for your talents and they're using it as, oh, you're in service to the Lord. You're using your voice for Jesus. You're praising the Lord. That's the best thing you could ever do for God, is to praise him. Like, but are they getting paid though? Because everything is so much more expensive. I think we know it, but I don't think we recognize it, that the middle class is being choked. We're in a chokehold of like everything is getting more and more expensive. And then we have the upper class like being like, oh, well, you shouldn't spend money on avocado toast or your iced coffee. And I'm so confused because I feel like worship leaders and church leaders also do that too when it comes to serving, because I know a lot of deacons will have very nice cars. All these pastors will have very nice cars. Their kids will go to private schools that are very expensive. My youngest sibling went to a private school and his tuition was $35,000 a year. He got that all paid for a scholarship because my dad died, but it was still $35,000 a year before my dad died. And all of the pastor's kids went to that school. There were 5 kids. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. And all these kids get brand new cars on their birthdays. And I'm like, there's a huge discrepancy with these pastors that are saying, oh, you need to serve. You need to, I'm here every single day. Well, sir, you're getting paid. It is your job. Being a pastor, you are paid. This is not the 1500s where you are just a humble servant of the Lord living in the church and eating off of the bread of the commune and whatever anybody else brings. Oh, there's a nice lady. Oh, thank you for having me over for dinner. No, that's not happening. They're taking the funds from these donations. I'm using quotes, donations. They're taking the funds and they're using it to live kind of extravagantly. And it makes me sick.
I think that was part of the reason why, I had my own issues with some of the theological beliefs. But I think that was a big thing that sort of pushed me out the door a little bit quicker, is there's this whole idea that Christians are supposed to be set apart and act different and embody the fruits of the Spirit. And I just so rarely saw that, like when I'm reflecting back, this thing, right? Like your relationship with God that was supposed to be so transformative to who you are as a person in your life and everything like that, right? You're supposed to be like made brand new in a sense. I just saw people continuing to act like people, like who are greedy, who are self-centered. And I don't think people are all bad, but I think, again, the emphasis in Christianity is that you're transformed as a person, right? That like Jesus imbues you with all of these like incredible traits and you don't act like the world, etc. And the more, different churches got exposed and the more I had my own personal interactions with like really iffy Christians, I was just like, I don't think there's anything different happening here. Like, I think we're all just human beings trying to figure out what the heck we're doing in this life. Like, and we're all kind of a mixture of like beautiful and broken traits. And I just feel like you're acting like a Christian, that you've overcome being a human in a way. And I'm just watching you still be a human. And I don't mean that in a judgmental way. I just mean that in a way of like, I think we're all the same, right? And there's this idea that like you're really separate and set apart as a Christian, and like these things don't affect you anymore, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's just like, every time something comes out, right? Like sexual abuse or any sort of money fraud, embezzlement, like things, right? Like huge church scandals that have come out every year almost, right? The excuse is always like, well, that's not the real church, right? Or like, or they fell away. And for me, I was always like, at what point does it no longer become the exception? It's the rule, right? It just feels like it's happened with so much frequency that you can no longer say this is the exception. And this is now more just the rule of what's happening in church. And I think the more you pretend as though they're doing something wrong, as opposed to maybe something being inaccurate with how you're describing your faith, that would feel more honest to me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Some forms of spiritual or religious abuse include preventing an individual from having control over their life by prohibiting forms of self-expression. This may include preventing them from wearing clothing that they would like, denying their sexual or gender identity, forcing them to follow a role assigned. For example, if you're a woman, some churches prevent women from entering the workplace. And Baptist church, it was ingrained in me like my entire childhood of just being like, women need to dress modestly. If you are dressing immodestly, you are causing other people to stumble, you're causing other people to sin.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all on you. There's just so much victim blaming, and it's so ingrained in our society that many people think it's all right. They just think it's normal. They think it's okay to be like, oh, well, what was she wearing? Or, oh, she, of course she would get a reaction like that, dressed like that. And
right.
I bring it all back to like limiting or prohibiting forms of self-expression. Like, I would not be allowed to dye my hair this color in my childhood home. Like, as soon as I left, I started dyeing my hair, expressing myself. Like, I go by they, them, she, her. I prefer they, them, because it's like, I just want to be a being. I sometimes feel like there's too much tied to being a woman. There's too much tied to being a man. Why can't I just be me? And with the whole like sexual expression, like, I am a bisexual person. I think both people are beautiful. I think everybody's just gorgeous. And I think to myself, my whole childhood, it was very shamed of, you are who you hang out with. Don't hang out with those people. Those people are bad. They're going to alter you. Like, they're going to make you sin. They're going to cause you to stumble.
Yeah.
But Jesus hung out with prostitutes. Did Jesus become a prostitute? Was Jesus popping his bussy out on the streets? No, he was not.
Maybe
Jesus didn't.
we don't really know, to be honest.
We don't know. But the same sense of like, they're like, oh, you are who you hang out with. Don't hang out with these people. You're going to become like them. Which, in a sense, yes, you do start to take on traits of the people that you are surrounded by. That's true. But they would use it in a shaming way of being like, if you hang out with a lesbian, you're suddenly going to be a lesbian. Like, no. But also, if you are a lesbian and you have been repressing it your entire life and you start to hang out with people who fully can express themselves and however they choose, you may feel more comfortable to express yourself in the way that you feel, the way that you resonate with. Like,
Yep. I mean, yeah, it's especially for women. There is an even stricter set of guidelines. Somehow, in the church setting, it's all your fault, no matter what's happening. But then also, you're never allowed to rise to a position of power where you could actually change something too. So it's kind of a continual suppression mechanism, right? It's like, it's back to that thing we were talking about of like, there's always something to work on, always something to improve. And that is like triply true for cis women in the church. Is just, there's always something for you to be taking care of, managing, looking after for somebody else. And the idea is that it's your job, right? Especially in regards to sexuality. We're kind of given this immense responsibility of managing men's sexuality for them via what we do or don't wear, how we do or don't look at them, what we do or don't say, if we allow ourselves to be alone with them or not. At the end of the day, it's always your fault. I mean, it's really been only very recently where there's been even a slight shift into talking about men about owning their own actions. I mean, that's new. That's relatively new. And the idea is still, it is primarily women's job to behave in a way that does not increase lust or sexual sin or temptation in a way. It is almost primarily put on women, and it creates a lot of self-hatred that I've seen with clients, and ironically a lot of difficulty with sex and intimacy when they do get married and it is allowed in the church. It is so difficult to kind of remove that story from their brain, that this is bad, and me wanting this is bad, and me feeling arousal is bad, and me approaching my husband is bad. It's the shame that we've talked about, and that doesn't just go away when somebody puts a ring on.
Yeah, it really doesn't just go away. Honestly, it can be intensified. Have you seen or heard of the Girl Defined YouTube channel?
Yes, Girl Defined. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I despise them. The Trauma Dump podcast disavows entirely Girl Defined. Just putting that out there. I don't like them. Everything, all their rhetoric is extremely false, very harmful, and can cause trauma. And I've seen some of their clips of where they'll be talking about, oh, how do I please my husband? And more recently, they've gotten into this whole idea of, it's okay to wear lingerie. It's okay to go get feel sexy for your husband. But previous videos, the whole rhetoric is like, don't hug before marriage, don't kiss your person before marriage, like very shameful against like anybody in the LGBTQIA spectrum.
Yeah.
It's and I just feel so bad for them. I look at them and I just feel like such overwhelming like sorrow for them, because it's like you have been so ingrained into this toxic patriarchal religious sector that you cannot grasp it in a way of like being like, it's okay to just be myself, and now you have to shame other people to start feeling better about yourself, or start to be, they think of themselves as like the girl defined, the poster for what women should be, what a wife should be, what a mother should be.
Yeah.
And I feel so bad for them, because behind all that rhetoric, behind all of that whatever, those are two very deeply wounded women. Very deeply wounded. And we can say I pray for them, but deeply I do, and not the sense of like I'm praying to God, but I'm hoping and wishing that they wake up, that they recognize that, oh my gosh, I despise myself. Why do I despise myself so much? Because honestly, with a lot of patriarchal religion, it's the woman has to go against herself, against her needs, against her wishes, her desires, her own fulfillment, to please someone else, to fulfill a role for someone else, like a homemaker, a wife, a mother.
Yes.
And
it's always who you are in relation to another man.
or who you are in relation to your children. And it's part of the reason why I love Jane Austen so much. But like, you are not the roles that you fill. That's not that's not your personality, but they make it as if, a mother is all my personality, or a wife is just my entire personality.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me very sad. What do you think on that? Why do you think that some women take so much arrogance and pride in this illusion of just like, I am a good wife, I'm a good mother, this is everything that I am, and I'm better than you because I'm a mother, or I'm better than you because I'm a wife, I'm fulfilling the duty God assigned to me? Why do you think they take so much pride in that?
Well, I think in most cases, those are the primary ways that women are given to feel worthy in some way. Those are the socially prescribed ways for women to feel a sense of worth. So if you achieve those things, you get married, you have children, you're a successful homemaker, wife, etc., mother. I mean, those are your ways to experience a sense of self, really. Those are your only areas. And so also, if you're thinking of it as if they're in a more strict gender rolled church too, there's sort of an obligation attached to them of getting married and having children and submitting to your husband and serving. It's part of your role as a woman to do that. And so I think women that are still really heavily influenced by those ideas, when they see women not wanting that or wanting a different version of marriage and children, it feels as though they're not fulfilling their obligation as a woman, right? And they're kind of, in most cases, just spouting the same shameful rhetoric that has been told to them, which is that it is your obligation and you not meeting it. I think in a lot of ways it becomes this competition when it doesn't need to be, right? Like it feels as though if I'm not doing that, then somehow I'm saying it's bad that you're doing that, right? Like if you love being a mom and a wife, but I don't necessarily put the same value on it, that somehow immediately it's this competition,
Or it's an attack.
Yeah, or it's an attack on what you've chosen to really center your life around. I mean, it's a lot of it comes out of like different waves of feminism too. There was such a fight to give any other option to women besides just being in the home, right? That there's sort of this natural competitiveness between like a working woman and like a homemaker, right? And I feel like that still hasn't fully completely gone away, where the whole idea is that women have a choice to do whatever they'd like to do and it be okay. And so it's an interesting kind of competition, but I think a lot of it kind of stems from the idea that in Judeo-Christian faiths, women have an obligation to be wives and to be mothers. Because also the whole patriarchal system breaks down if women don't continue to fulfill those roles. I mean, humanity ceases to exist if women are like, actually, I don't want to have kids with you. Like, I don't want to do this, right? Like, there's huge amounts of weight on everyone, women sort of like staying in line in that way. So.
Yeah. And the idea of choice, if women are supposed to fulfill these roles, the idea of choice is completely removed. You know, in an the animal kingdom, the females make the decision of who they wish to mate with. They make the decision of, I like your genetic whatevers. I like that you can run and just kill that thing real quick. I want my children to be able to run and kill that thing real quick. We're going to have babies. I think that choice is really removed from Judeo-Christian society, because they're like, oh, we need to be picked. I need to be chosen. I need to be chosen by the guy, instead of I need to be able to also make that decision, to make that consent of choosing that guy too. It's always like, oh, he needs to choose me. The whole idea of proposals, like,
Yeah.
is the guy choosing you? Is like, oh, I like the way that you look and the things that you do. I think that you'd make a good wife, mother. We're gonna get married. We're gonna have this contract where I will provide essentially for you, and you're going to stay home and take care of my children. Instead of, in like the animal kingdom, it's quite the opposite most of the time. It's man having to prove, hey, I would make a good suitor for you for a bit. Like, I'm great. Instead of,
Yeah.
it's so backwards. And so from my own like personal beliefs, is like, disclaimer, this is Grace's beliefs, okay? My own personal belief, I think that it's so backwards that women have to be picked. I think that's so backwards. And it feels really wrong to me also, of the whole idea of when I was a young person and I was told by my parents I'm not allowed to date until I'm 18. And my dad would joke, though I never really knew if it was not a joke but real, be like, oh well, I'll pick your husband for you eventually, or something like that. And it made me very frustrated. It's like, well, why can't I make that decision? Why am I not trusted when I'm ready to start dating? Why are there so many restrictions upon my ability to make a decision? And that can really put women in such a space of the unsure, like, I don't know if I'm capable. When you are capable of making a decision for yourself.
Yeah.
But it's such a huge subjugation of these women, these people, of being like, I can't make a decision on my own. I need the counsel of my parents, or I need the counsel of my husband to be able to make this decision for me. And when it comes to like sexual trauma, it's the whole like, well, I'm not allowed to please myself. He needs to please me. And if I'm not getting satisfaction, then there's something wrong with me. And it's so backwards.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
so,
I mean,
oh my God.
there's like a piece too of women in general have a lower self view than men, for many factors, some of which we've already talked about, right? In terms of it's we have a lot of responsibility placed on us to care for others. We also are kind of socialized to be the emotional thermometer in most situations. We're expected to be more mature and thoughtful and giving than boys ever are growing up. But I think that overall, in general, women having a lower self view, especially in religious environments where there is so much shame placed on everyone, but like particularly women. It's also the idea of you not being like worthy of more in a partner, right? If we're talking about male female partnerships, it's the idea of being so glad that someone picked you, because why would anyone ever pick me, right? Because your self view has been so diminished by some of these familial, cultural, religious factors. And so oftentimes there's this idea of just like, thank God someone did pick me as a woman, right? Which is interesting now because we're kind of seeing a little bit of that turnaround in terms of, I don't know if you've heard about this being talked about, but there's like a huge epidemic of like lonely single men.
Yeah.
And there's sort of like a tide turning in terms of like women essentially saying like, I cannot accept the bare minimum anymore from a partner. I don't need you anymore to survive financially, right? To provide a roof for me. I can do that for myself. And so now women are requiring a very different set of marital skills from men than they've ever had to provide. Things like emotional intelligence, right? Or like contributions to the home and house, being an involved parent, These are all things that like have really never been, at least in Western society, a cultural expectation of men. Their expectation has been, if you're religious, be the spiritual leader, whatever that means, and bring home money. And now, because there's been such a shift in that dynamic, there are more and more men that aren't getting picked by women because women's standards are becoming higher and higher and higher, which is really fascinating, sort of like turning the whole thing on its head.
And I'm so glad it's happening. I'm really glad it's happening. And honestly, I've had discussions with some of my male friends about this, and I've had to cut off a couple male friends because their ideas are so ridiculous. For instance, I had a guy friend who I was friends with for many years. And one of my episodes, episode 6, is about sexual abuse. And he had seen a clip where she talked about a man that she slept with, but she asked him to stop, and he stopped for a moment, but then he kept continuing, and she talked about it as rape because it is rape. She asked him to stop. He coerced her into continuing, and she was extremely harmed by it, physically, mentally, emotionally. And my friend, I'm putting this in quotes, said that she wasn't raped. And so we had this whole debate of like, she was raped. He's like, but he stopped when she said to stop. But I was like, it's still rape. Coercion is not consent. It's not. And she felt like she had to, or something else would have happened. She started to discuss how he was abusive towards her and their relationship, and if she did not say yes, she knew that something bad would happen to her. That was rape. And then he went into this whole rhetoric of, you know, men need sex, and we're going to see a rise of these lonely men are just going to start raping women, and it's women's fault. And I'm like,
oh God,
what?
I love debunking myths like that men need sex. In no physiological or biological way is sex a need. It doesn't operate, just to like geek out for a second, it doesn't operate in the same sphere of your brain as it does for thirst or hunger. Those are genuine, or air, right? If you like hold your breath and you feel the impulse, like I have to like breathe, right? Sex doesn't operate within the same mechanisms in your brain. Sex is a desire. Sex is a want. Sex is great when you have it and you like it. Can you live without sex? 100%. Would you might be sad? Sure. But can you live without it? Yes. And so that is like one of my favorite things to debunk, especially in therapy spaces, where I'm just like, no. Men don't need sex, because that line, not only is it used to sort of wildly enough support claims of abuse and rape, but it's also used in other harmful contexts of people in marriage or in long-term relationships where there's a sort of idea that women are obligated to give men sex at a certain frequency or amount because they need it. It's a need for them. And that is simply scientifically not true in any regard.
It's not true. And so I was like, I'm gonna hear you out, because that's genuinely my personality. I will listen, but that doesn't mean that I'll accept what people have to say. And I heard him out, and he was like, well, do you think like half of the male population should be put in jail? I'm like, well, if half of the male population has raped or harmed another person, yes, I do fully believe that they should have some form of justice, some form of legal action against them. And he was like, well, that's ridiculous because men need sex, and it's a biological necessity. Like you people need us. That I'm thinking to myself, who are you? Like, who is this person? This can't be my friend. This can't be my friend. I was so shocked and hurt, dismayed completely of like, why are you acting this way? Because I had opened up with him several times in the past where I had been assaulted by a guy, because we were in college together. I was assaulted by a guy that he knew, and he was like, oh, I'll never talk to him again. And I'm thinking, is this the same person that said, oh, I'll never talk to that person again, or oh, I'm so sorry that that happened to you, that now you are blaming women for men's lack of impulse control. Now you are trying to hold women accountable for men not being able to restrain themselves, not being able to understand social cues, not being able to comprehend that they, like, women don't owe men anything. Men don't owe women anything either, but women do not owe men sex. Women do not owe men pleasure. Women do not owe men a glance. If you whistle at a woman, she shouldn't have to look at you. If you tell her to smile, she doesn't have to smile. Like, and I'm so glad that this is becoming a topic. Like, you hear it on the news of like, oh, they're like, there's a rise of lonely men. This is an epidemic of lonely men. Maybe these men need to be lonely. Maybe they need that self-reflection of like, maybe I'm the problem. Maybe what I'm doing is not working. Maybe I need to change and adapt. And you see like Andrew Tate and Fresh and Fit and all these things like, oh, I'm a real man. Like, I get pussy all the time. I'm a real man. Like, I totally get all the bitches, and you don't know anything because you're a woman. And they'll debate these young women who are incredibly naive. Like, I'll watch, they're incredibly naive. Some of them will make really valid points, and they'll just get yelled at and bullied and shamed. And they'll retreat because that is what has been driven into women, like, of all areas, not just religion, but women are told constantly to be submissive.
Yeah. Yep. We also have a pretty different view, women, in terms of communication style. Women value, part of this is socialization. Women value the skill of listening generally much more than men. For men, often speaking is sort of a competition in terms of who can say more, who knows more, who can be louder, who can speak more, etc. Who can be right. And generally, women do not approach communication and intimacy like that. And it often plays out like that in terms of trying to have these conversations between men and women, where men will just simply strong arm the conversation. And again, women are pretty conditioned to, like you said, kind of submit and play back, but also we're conditioned to be the peacekeepers of society. We are conditioned to be the peacekeepers in our relationships. Again, going back to the emotional thermometer in the room, we're conditioned. I think we also have some innate skill that's just higher there than men, but it's hard to know, right, where it's like the chicken or the egg, which comes first. Like, how much does culture really influence something that might be innate? That's a question that we still ask about a lot of things. But in the end, it doesn't really matter. It's just that this idea that we are really conditioned to be the peacemakers and also really suppress healthy anger as women. Yeah. Right? Because especially in those situations with like an Andrew Tate kind of person, if a woman starts matching him at that level and intensity, like, she's immediately kind of called a bitch. And so you can't even really express healthy anger in a way without it having some sort of judgment on it.
Yeah. Reactionary abuse is something that I have dealt with my entire life. Also, quick break. Gigi is wanting to say hello.
Hi.
She's like, there's the bed. Oh. And she's like, there's a little stool. And so she's reached over as far as she possibly can to vibe with the podcast.
She is vibing.
She's the sweetest girl there ever was. Anyway, Gigi break. But so reactionary abuse, for those that don't know, is when someone is yelling at you, you match their energy, right? You yell back, and then they're like, oh, why are you yelling at me? You're crazy. You're acting crazy. what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, calm yourself, like, chill out. Like, it's not that deep. I hear it's not that deep all the time. It makes me so mad. But
that is a form of gaslighting, just so you know.
And it's so prevalent in our culture of reactionary abuse, especially with men towards women. You know, like you said, women are like, there's a rise of women like saying, I don't accept the bare minimum anymore. You know, the bare minimum does not work for me. I can find somebody who will meet my needs, or I can just meet my needs on my own. I don't need you. And men get angry about it because, of course, like, that's a natural reaction. Like, you, from their perspective, I've talked to lots of men about this. From their perspective, they're like, well, this for me seems like a lot of work that, you know, I don't want to do, because it's just a lot. Like, nobody's ever had to do this much before. Like, why do I have to go to therapy? Why can't I just vibe and exist? And it's like, well, we're not accepting that anymore. We're working towards getting better. We're moving the little line. You were fine with providing for us, but we're like, hey, I would just like to have a conversation with you once in a while, just to like talk. They're like, oh no, I don't want to talk. Oh.
Yep.
And,
Also, go ahead.
And so now women are saying, hey, I don't accept that. And so men are in their way fighting back, I guess, is what they would say. They're fighting back. Like, they're like, oh, feminism, new wave of feminism is killing us. And it's like, no. I think it's bringing a new age of everybody being more socially aware. And I think it's going to create a rise for better men, for men that are more equipped to deal with things, for men that are more equipped to comprehend and understand how other people feel. And I think there will eventually be a rise in less violent crimes once we start to comprehend how mental health affects us and start to treat mental health more and have more resources for it. Because, you know, with the rise of technology for medical equipment, there were people that fought it. There were people that were like, no, the power of prayer heals all. Like, I don't take medicine. I don't do whatever. That existed. That's less now. I think it's going to bring the rise of people being more socially aware. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's nuance to everything, but overall I would agree. I think in that way, I mean, because we're operating under a patriarchal society, women have also always had to be subversive in their power. They've always had to, they couldn't out wrestle or run. So we often use like withholding and our love and things like we found new ways to find power in a system where we were kind of stripped of a lot of power. And I think women essentially saying, no, I'm not going to date this kind of person anymore, or like, no, I will end the relationship if XYZ happens, or these are my expectations. I mean, like, again, we'd have to look at what some of the expectations are, but overall they're just like things like emotional intelligence and like equal contributions to the household, like things that are very just like bare minimum. I think in a way it's like women exerting their power in a subversive way of essentially it's withholding for a cause. Like, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you, or like I'm not going to like be involved with you in these senses because I have higher standards. And it's sort of throughout history, like that women doing that in the ways that they could within the structures they were in has been what has shifted history throughout time. It's a, in the same way you think about like way back in like royal days, right, with like Anne Boleyn, like King Henry, like you have the structure of like males in power up front, but then like behind the scenes what's actually happening is like women controlling and like moving the pieces via men. And now I think that's shifted a lot. But I think that that's sort of, it's another move that women are making, which is like pretty badass in a lot of ways, of just being like, this is the way that I can exert my power, is who I let into my life and who I don't. And either men will change and grow, or they won't. And they will be sort of left behind, like, in a sense. I mean, that's kind of how slow wave change occurs in culture is.
Yeah, definitely. And then it makes me think of like World War I and World War II, of women starting to take up the work of men, quoting, and working hard and thinking like, hey, this is I enjoy this. I enjoy actually being feeling like I'm capable. I enjoy learning a new skill. And I think of my great-great-grandmother, who was in Nazi Germany, and she was conscripted to make parachutes. And her way of change for that was she put rips and holes in all 1,000 parachutes that she made. And I don't know how many people she killed by doing that, but kind of badass. That's pretty freaking cool.
Badass.
And the Nazis found out about her, and she was rescued by my great-great-grandfather, who then brought her to New York because suddenly the Americans invaded Germany and she was rescued. And it's insane. I think she also got a lot of other women to do that as well. And I think that's part of the reason why now, if you're skydiving, you have to have 2 parachutes. You have to have a backup.
Is all because you're great.
I really do think that. That's what I think in my brain.
Be.
It's like, she was like, fuck you guys. Like,
yeah.
A lot of I don't think people recognize that in Nazi Germany, most of the people serving were forced. Were forced to. They had no other option. Like, it's either serve or be murdered. And another thing with history was they call them, I think, let me think about it. It's like horizontal collaborators, where the women that slept with Nazis, but though I truly believe that those women were trying to save their lives and also trying to save their children's lives. You hear so many stories of these young women that would try to help prevent their families from being murdered by these Nazis by seducing them, by sleeping with them, by keeping them at bay. And it did work. It's another way of women using their power. And I know of 2 sisters, I'll put a link in the description, where they would try to seduce Nazis and then they would murder them. Vibes. Absolute vibes.
Absolute vibes. I mean, it's like what we're talking about, which is like, it's subversive power, which has a play in religion, because that's sort of, it like feeds each other, where like we talk about women in the church as like temptresses, right? Of like, you better clothe them yourself and like, don't tempt him. But it's also related to this idea that like, sometimes throughout history, sexually exerting power was the only way that women had to exert power, right? To seduce, to charm, to manipulate, which become like these very negative, like describers of women now. And I think we fail to recognize some of the origin points of how those tactics came about. Like, it's this idea that like women are inherently like this, as opposed to these are their best tools under a patriarchal system. You know what I mean? We kind of fail to see the origin point there, and you make it more of this like moral judgment on how like witchy and like seducing women are, as opposed to like, that was probably their only way to actually have any sort of empowerment ever at all, and to get what they want, or to try to have their voice heard in any way, for a long time in history.
Yeah, it really is. So the podcast purpose is to identify trauma and how we can help heal ourselves and heal others. And the mantra of the podcast is, trauma isn't who you are, it's what you go through. So my question would be, would you consider what you've gone through as trauma?
I think in certain degrees, yes. I think trauma is anything that goes beyond your ability to cope in that moment. And so there have been plenty of times throughout my Christianity, my life, where that was true. And so I think the biggest, the most traumatizing maybe event that kind of kicked off a lot of my deconstructing, and even my desire to be a therapist too, was my own divorce, which was extremely traumatizing. But in a way, it sort of kicked off the desire I have to help people now. And it really was like the kicking off point for me dismantling almost my entire faith at the time.
Yeah. And divorce is traumatic, whether or not, I mean, it's a separation, honestly. Any form of separation can be extremely traumatic. I think divorce is one of the most traumatizing things that you can go through, especially if you are a woman in a religious construct, because women are taught from very young age, like I can't wait to be a wife. I can't wait to be a mommy. Like, you play with the toys that women are given are baby dolls, are like Barbies, are we want to look up to these ideas of being caretaker. And it's so, you said like it was key to your deconstruction. Would you like to elaborate more on that, of what has deconstruction meant for you? What has it led you to start doing?
Yeah. I think I've been slowly deconstructing for a while. I just didn't call it that. I called it questions that I had. But I think I reached a certain point post divorce. Anytime you go through something sort of traumatizing, you're pretty raw after for a while, which in some cases can be kind of a gift, because I was much more, I felt like I had nothing to lose, right? Where I was like, I need to figure out like what I believe and like what my faith is, and like, because I mean, life is wild and unpredictable, right? And so I think for the most part, it started with the idea of um, really struggling with this idea that the God that I love and that loves me would send people to hell who didn't believe in him. The more I started, because around the same time as my divorce, I was also finishing my degree and starting to like work as a therapist. And the more I was learning about human relationships, of like what constitutes healthy, good ones, the more I saw like the divine God relationship is like, hold up, like this is not, if a human being was saying, you have free will to love me or not, but if you don't choose to love me, you will be spending an eternity suffering. Like, we would call that an abusive relationship, right? Because there is actually no option to love or not love God. If you don't love him, you're punished severely forever. It's a threat almost. And so that I like could not get over that idea of like, how how do we say this is a good loving God, yet that's like the premise of like salvation, and like even like the story of Jesus coming and saving us from that fate of going to hell. Like, it's pinnacle to the Christian religion, and I just could not get around it. I was like, how do I come to terms with that's who you are, God? Like, according to the Bible, is like that's what you'll do. And if people do say they love you but operate in different ways or have a different belief, like then they'll still go to hell. And so it just felt extremely controlling, and without actual choice. And the more I was learning about like how human relationships thrive with choice, and how all of these things that we were describing with God just didn't line up with what I had seen with people in terms of healthy relationships, I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can. It made me at first be like, who are you to God? Like, actually, because how can you be like all good and all powerful and all knowing and do things like this? Or like let people be born just to like suffer and die. Like, I was just like, how does that work? And so, again, I don't have like conclusive answers right now, but I feel more comfortable being like, I don't know. And that doesn't make sense to me, than being like, well, I have to believe something, right? Like a fear-based faith. I feel like more free in my life and in my choices now that I'm like, I'm actually not sure like what's going on in the spiritual realm. I have no idea. Like, I don't know if there is a God, if there isn't a God, if there is a God, what they're like. I'm just not sure. I have impulses, I have inclinations, but it feels better to just say like, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that really bothers some Christians that I tell, but I don't know, it just feels like way more comfortable than like forcing an answer that doesn't really make sense. It has there's a lot of like incongruencies in the Bible and in the Christian faith, and we just sort of like look over them. So I just felt like I couldn't do that anymore. I was like at a point where I was like, I need to be fully transparent and honest, because I don't know, like it just felt like there was no other option at that time.
Yeah.
So
I think it's okay to be comfortably confused.
yeah, I do too. It's been very freeing.
Yes. How wonderful is it to just not know? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a nanny to 4 boys for 7 years, and I homeschooled them for the last 2 years of nannying them, and I recently quit in August. But I loved them very much. I still love them, but I'm no longer third parent. I'm no longer involved in their lives. I had to have that separation because I was losing my mind. And I'm not their parent. I did everything I could to be there for them, but I couldn't. But when I was homeschooling them, they would often ask me questions, and I would say, I don't know. They're like, well, aren't you supposed to know this? You're supposed to teach us. I was like, well, why don't we learn together? Why don't we find this out together? Because I don't know. I'm not going to know everything. And that was something I reinforced with them. Like, there is no way for you to know everything. There's no way. There's no way for me to know everything. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing why the insides of a whale are so big. I'm okay with that. Would I like to maybe learn more about the insides of a whale? Yeah, sure. I would like to learn more.
Yeah.
I'm okay with not knowing whether angels and demons exist. I'm okay with that. Maybe one day, if they have substantial evidence of either, would I like to look into it? Sure. But there is no substantial evidence. And therefore, I cannot make a conclusion of whether or not they exist. I could have a faith that, yeah, I'm sure these things probably exist, but I can't conclusively say, I can't factually determine whether or not they exist. And that's okay. If some people believe in ghosts and spirits and spooky vibes, let them believe that. Just because I'm not saying I don't, but just because I don't believe in that doesn't mean they're wrong. That was like another huge thing of my own deconstruction with religion, was that my family members were saying all these millions of people are just wrong. Like, well, they don't think that they're wrong. And when I went to college and I started talking to other people about their faiths, and I started to get more involved with conceptualizing what the Hindu religion is, what the Buddhist religion is, what the Jewish religion is, what the Muslim religion is, I started to think, well, the Jewish religion, the Christian religion, and the Muslim religion, they all have the same God. They do. And they all have like overlaps of whatever they believe. And Jewish people do not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. Christians believe he is the Messiah. Muslims believe that he is a prophet, that he is God's son, but it's a bit different. And when I went home and I tried to have a conversation with my Mimi and Papa about it, of like my findings of, I believe that Muslims and Christians and Jewish people all believe in the same God. They fought me on that. They're like, no, Muslims, they're deceived by the devil and Satan and like blah 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 blah. I'm like, well, but they all have the same basis in the same God. Why can't they? Why is it that just because they have a difference in faith that they're wrong? And I got so attacked that I was like, well, now I can't talk about these things. You guys are not safe people to have an open and honest discussion with about my beliefs and other people's beliefs. And I genuinely don't know what I believe.
Yeah.
I really don't, because time and time again, I'm saying to myself that if God really was all powerful, all knowing, if he really loved, he only wants the best for me, then he would not have let my dad get hit by a car. He would not have let my dad die from a TBI. He would not have let my father continue to suffer and be trapped in his body. And he would not allow, my mother to constantly abuse me, like over and over and over. And it's like, I don't know whether or not there is a God, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with not knowing. I'm okay with not knowing whether or not my dad is in heaven, because that doesn't, in all actuality, that doesn't matter. All I know is that he's not here with me right now. That's sad. I'm allowed to grieve that, but I can't hold out hope that I'm going to see him in heaven, because that's an uncertainty. You don't know. We don't know. And it honestly, from my own experience, halts the grief process of being, oh, I'll just see him again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's gone. He's not here. I cannot speak to my dad. I cannot hear from him. I cannot get his guidance. Like, I could pray all the time. I won't actually be able to hear him. Even if he's in the ether screaming, I can't hear him. And that's part of the loss of, like, yes, I love my dad. He is gone. I'm not going to hold out this hope, this faith, this strength. In my opinion, it's delusional of thinking that, oh, everything's going to be okay because I'm going to see him again. Maybe I will see him again, but that's not, from my own experience, that's not something I should think about, because it's, in my opinion, it's delusional, and it's not letting me have mindfulness and a basis in reality.
Yeah, that's something that happens a lot with religious people. Is it is really difficult for a lot of us to grieve fully, because you have to admit that something is wrong, right? Like, it was wrong that your dad was killed in that way. Like, that it meets one of those walls, right, where for people who have faith, they kind of say, like, well, God's ways are higher than ours, right? Like, they kind of, in so many words, admit that they don't know, but they can't admit that God might be in the wrong, or that there might be something off, right? And the grief process really has to include like a full spectrum of that, of like, I'm so angry this happened. I'm so upset this happened. This should have never happened. It feels so wrong that he's not here, because it is wrong. I mean, it is. Death is like so natural, yet it feels completely unnatural when someone dies. You're just like, how is that? How did that happen? And I think to properly grieve, you have to sit in that for a while, usually. And that can be really uncomfortable within a faith worldview of like, God's in control. He's got everything, in his hands. It sort of could make you question, who is God actually, that he would let something like that happen. I think a lot of times I did for years, just kind of push it to the back of my brain when things like that happen. Just like, well, I know God's good. That's all I know, right? And you sort of compartmentalize the rest.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask, how are you feeling right now? How are you doing?
Feeling good. Yeah.
What would you want the viewers to know about recovering from religious abuse?
Honestly, the biggest thing that's been refreshing for me is to realize like how many people have felt abused or traumatized, or just like negatively impacted by their religious upbringing or certain tenets of their faith. That the biggest thing I want people to know is that they are not in that, and that there's a lot of resources for people who are recovering. And I firmly believe that not abuse, but your faith, your spirituality, your religion that you grew up with, it doesn't have to be all a bad thing, right? You're allowed to sit in the gray with it. You're allowed to say, these parts of religion or spirituality or this certain belief, I still actually really value, but the rest I don't know about, right? Or like this and this, I think I'm still going to take with me, but this and this I want to leave behind. I think I would encourage them to embrace the gray a bit more, in terms of either not knowing or pointing out like what was a great experience, what influenced them positively, and then leaving what was negative for them, because religion really encourages an all or nothing kind of approach, and that can feel so overwhelming, because it feels like such a big loss of identity for people who grew up in the church. That was a big part of who they were and how they acted and their moral view. And so it's easier to navigate if you allow yourself to just take pieces at a time, or one belief at a time, or one tenet at a time.
Okay.
That's where I'd start, I think.
Yeah. Do you have any resources or recommendations you'd like to share?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So many books. One is, it's a book called When Religion Hurts You, and it's all about recovering from religious trauma. And then another one is called Beyond Shame, and it's specifically about how growing up religious can affect your sex life and your sexuality, kind of sexual trauma and abuse too, that falls under that category. And then if you're still, because my focus is on predominantly sexual wellness within the church, I mean, with deconstruction too, but if you're still in the church and you're still trying to figure out like, what do I believe, what's happening, especially within your own like marriage, like you're trying to figure out your sex life, there is a book by, her name's Sheila Gregor. Make sure I get the name right. It is called She Deserves Better. And it is all about kind of the unfair expectations that we've talked about, in terms of placing all of this pressure on women, the obligatory message of sex for Christian women, the shaming that women go through. And it's a great book if you are realizing some of these things about like sex and sexuality, but you don't quite want to leave the faith. You're trying to figure out how to blend both. That's a great book. So.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I will put links to the books in the description. So, effects of religious abuse. All abuse leaves a lasting mark, even if you're unable to process it. Just like physical scars, spiritual abuse can leave an emotional and mental scar, as well as change the image of how you view God or another higher power, even if you believe there's one at all. 8 effects of religious abuse include developing depression, developing complex post-traumatic stress disorder or CPTSD, feeling lost without religion, losing your faith, experiencing an inability to feel certain emotions, feeling betrayed by God or others, sexual dysfunction, and feeling isolated in any community. So from the list of these, which one do you resonate most with?
Honestly, the biggest one is feeling, I think, betrayed by God. That was something I still wrestle with it, but I wrestled with it intensely for years. The last, I'd say, three or so years. Yeah, you just feel. I felt like I had been like deceived, by him, by God, and that made me feel really betrayed because we're supposed to have a relationship. It's supposed to be loving and connected and caring. And I just felt like, how could you essentially dupe me, like be something that you're actually not, because these beliefs that we have versus the actions that I see versus how the world actually works, like none of it makes sense with who I've been told God is. And so I felt really, I guess, feeling lost too. That like losing your faith, that feeling too. That was really strong for a few years. Not so much now, but definitely in the beginning of my deconstruction, it was massive feelings of being like lost and unsure of who I was.
Yeah. And that loss, losing your religion, that is a grief moment. You have to process that grief because, especially with Christianity, it becomes very much ingrained in your personality. I remember I went to 14 different schools growing up, and I was always known growing up as the Christian girl. I was like, oh, that's the Christian girl. And as a child, I thought to myself, like, well, why wouldn't you just know me by my name, Grace? Like, I would be referred to, I went to 14 different schools, so people would meet me, and then I guess Christianity was the biggest thing that just flew in their face, and they were like, oh, well, that's the Christian girl. And it was really a big part of my personality. I shattered my entire arm, my entire left arm. I used to be left-handed. I shattered it when I was 14, and I had a giant cast up to my elbow. And for whatever reason, I wrote Jesus on it. I was like, Jesus is going to sign my cast. I'm going to write it on my cast, because no one had signed my cast. And I thought to myself, well, Jesus would have signed my cast. So I wrote it on my cast, and I got mocked and made fun of for it, because they're like, you're such a weird freak. And I loved Toby Mac growing up. I actually won a contest, and I got to sing on stage with Toby Mac and Mandisa when I was like 13 years old in front of, I think, 20,000 people. And it was a lot of fun. It was super fun. But he has a song called Jesus Freak. He's like, I don't really care if they call me a Jesus freak or they label me a Jesus freak. There's no denying the truth.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be thought of as that. I don't want to be just labeled Jesus freak or labeled as a Christian. I want to be known by who I am, by my character, by my achievements, by my general way of being, by how I impact other people. And I think that was a huge part of my deconstruction, was actually learning who I am and accepting myself and being able to express myself without fear or guilt. And just, my family is still extremely Christian. I was very indoctrinated, but I always knew that I was the weird one. And now I wear it very, like, proudly. I'll be the weird Taylor. I will be the weird Taylor that everyone's like, oh, that's the black sheep of the family. Even though I'm the whitest of my entire family, I will be the black sheep to all these mixed people and just vibe. Like, I will dye my hair random colors and exist. And whether or not you choose to like it, accept it, that doesn't matter to me. I'm just me.
Yeah. That's been like the most freeing part, I think, for coming out of the other side of, feeling so angry and lost, is on the other side. And I feel like every Christian I've told this like feels like I'm making it up, but I feel so much lighter in my everyday life because I don't have this question back and forth of like, oh my God, like was that thought like me or my flesh or the devil? Like, should I be doing this or that? Like, I trust myself so much more now in terms of making good decisions, right? Of being myself, of what that means. It is like so much simpler not having these like really strict, rigid ideals and faith points. It is so refreshing. Like, I wish I could like let someone who's like questioning their faith like feel my brain just for a little bit of just like, it is way quieter in here in terms of like things I just accept about myself, like making decisions that feel good to me. I don't know. It's just like it's so refreshing in a lot of ways. It just feels like very, again, like I just trust myself a lot more, which makes
Mhm.
living like a lot easier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's so freeing to just be.
Yeah.
Just be me. That's
Yeah.
that's what freedom is for me. And I think that is success. It's being comfortable in your own body. And that doesn't mean that you're not still in pain, that you don't acknowledge these trials, that you don't still have anxiety, but feeling that wholeness of I exist and how I'm existing is okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a huge healing moment that I'm really happy for you that you have had that much growth and success. And you have a master's in pastoral counseling, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What was that like? What is that like now that you're like, I have a master's in pastoral counseling? What does that make you think?
Yeah, it was interesting because I was like sort of beginning deconstruction while I was in my last year of school. So I would be taught certain things from like a biblical perspective in my counseling classes, and I'd be like, I don't think I'm actually going to apply that like in my work with clients. Um, so it's been interesting because I have a lot of people like new clients and interested reaching out and being like, hey, like I'm not religious. Is that okay? Like, can we work together? So I think the name gets really sticky for a lot of people, but I always try to clarify like your therapy is your therapy, right? Like I have training in counseling and then also training in like the spiritual aspect. So if it is important to you, then we can talk about it. If it's not important to you, then it won't come up. I try to really set the stage for counseling that I'm not here to evangelize to you in any way, because that's been a lot of people's experience with Christian counseling. Um, and I want to be as far away from that as possible. I want to use scientifically backed and researched methods. I want to be trauma informed. I want to be inclusive in all of my work. And so it's interesting because it's brought me like this beautiful little niche of clients where they have like a spiritual background, but they're sort of like it influences me, but like I don't believe that anymore, but I still feel it like clinging on. It's kind of like this beautiful blend in that way of like, personally I can relate to you and like clinically I understand what you're saying too. And so in that way it's been sort of like fascinating to kind of like have a foot in both worlds. um it's helped me find like the people I want to work with, which is people who are deconstructing, or people who do come from faith systems but are kind of like the black sheep, or they're like wondering like, I don't know if I believe this still, or this, or like this has been like negatively impacting me. Like those are, I love working with people like that. So in that way it's been sort of a blessing, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was really interesting because I don't think your TikTok says pastoral counseling. I think it says counseling. But a lot of your videos are about, you know, sexual repression, trauma, stuff like that, like pleasure. I really do like your videos. And when I contacted you, I asked for your credentials and you're like pastoral counseling. I was like, oh, oh,
I
oh,
know,
oh,
crazy. I know.
what? This person
Yeah,
has a degree in pastoral counseling. It was such like a mind flip of being like, whoa, you're such a two-dimensional character.
thank you, I think. Yeah,
I
yeah, it's, yeah.
I say that in the most loving like way possible because my entire background is in theater. I really want to become a film director one day. I mean, I've been
Mm,
acting professionally since I was 3 years old. So I'm saying that from just like the most loving, you're not 1D, like so
yeah,
many dimensions. Like, oh my goodness, what a fun person. But yes.
it's definitely, it's a blend of worlds, I would say. It's a blend of worlds.
Dance the both worlds.
That is the song. I love it. I truly love it.
Awesome. So thank you so much for sharing with
Thank
us.
you.
Thank you for talking about your experiences, opening up. I really appreciate it. And I'm honestly very proud of you. Good job.
I'm proud of you. I mean, you're like doing your own thing. You were saying you didn't work, but then you listed all the things that you're doing that are actually immense work. So I think you should be really proud of yourself too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Today's memes of the week from our Discord are right here. If you're listening to us over on Spotify, go check us out on YouTube to watch our memes of the week. At the end of every episode, we spin our wheel of emotions to learn a new feeling and how it correlates to my trauma. All right, here it is. Ooh, it landed on anxious. I think that's one of like the first times it has landed on like over here. Anxious. Okay, when am I feeling anxious? All the time. I think I got diagnosed with like severe anxiety and panic disorder when I was 15 years old. Um, the age of 15 was a really big turning point for me, mental health wise. It was the year I was sexually assaulted. It was the year my parents' business burned down. And it was the year I first tried to commit suicide and was forced to go live with my grandparents. I was forced out of my home to go live with my grandparents because, frankly, my mother didn't want to deal with me. And so at the time, I had an amazing cat. His name was Clark Kent, and he was my emotional support animal. I got a letter from my doctor, and she was like, "Yeah, he's there for you. If he is someone," she called him someone because for me he was like a person. "If he's someone that takes care of you when you feel like you're not being taken care of other people, yeah, of course." And I got diagnosed, I got medicated, I started getting better. And I actually took my cat with me to college. He lived with me in my dorms. And unfortunately, he had a pre-existing heart condition that we didn't know about, and he had a heart attack and died in 2021, in July 2021. So he only lived to be about 6 years old. But he was my best friend. He and Gigi, my service dog, were best friends. They were with each other all the time. And I noticed that when I had him near me, I felt less anxious. He grounded me in a way. Many people conceptualize anxiety as fear of the future, as being afraid of what is going to happen. In fact, anxiety is in the fear feeling column, right? Anxiety is correlated with feeling overwhelmed and worried. And I have a lot of anxiety. I still have anxiety. And how I cope with it is I try to connect with myself and connect with the things around me. I try to ground myself in the present. I try to be mindful of my responses. Why am I so afraid? Why am I letting this fear control me? And so often it's because I'm unsure. I'm unsure if I'm going to be taken care of. I'm unsure if I'm going to survive. And the saying, whatever will be, will be. Que sera, sera. You know, what will be, will be. And it's such a like flippant saying, but sometimes it helps me a lot. You're like, whatever happens, I'm going to be able to deal with it. I'm going to be able to figure it out. I'm not going to be abandoned by myself. Forget everyone else. I'm not going to abandon myself. And that has been incredibly helpful in my healing journey, is to not self-abandon. Because from my own experience, that's part of what anxiety is. It's not trusting yourself. It's not trusting what's going to happen. So from my own experience, the key to healing anxiety, to grounding yourself, is being assured in yourself, is loving yourself, is appreciating yourself, is having confidence that you will get through it. And that's all I have to say on that. Special thanks goes out to all of our Discord users. You guys are the best, and your encouragement is super beneficial. If you'd like to support our podcast, we have a Patreon. Different tiers can get you a bracelet made by me, like this one, this little mushroom, or you can get a sticker. The link is in our description. We also have a bonfire where you can get custom apparel designed by yours truly. Any support helps us out a lot. So please, if you feel compelled to, like, share, subscribe, and please rate the show. It helps us out a lot. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching if you're over on YouTube. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Remember, you are capable of a fulfilling life in spite of your circumstances and your trauma. May you rise from the ashes and be filled with peace, love, hope, joy, and understanding. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.